named and codified by Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin. Ostensibly concerned with heredity and what would later be known as genetics, the eugenicists believed that the rich and powerful were rich and powerful not because of luck or chance or happenstance, and certainly not from the deployment of cutthroat business tactics and underhanded dealings. No, the rich and powerful had attained their status because they came from better stock. Conversely, the poor were poor because of their defective germplasm. As transparent as it seems to us today that this ideology was a self-serving self-justification for the ruling class, it was quickly taken up as the great social crusade of the early 20th century. From Teddy Roosevelt to H.G. Wells to Julian Huxley to Winston Churchill, there was widespread support for the eugenicist notion that society must strive to make sure that the rich and well-born breed as much as possible, and the poor, infirm, and feeble-minded be prevented from having children. A common eugenicist argument was that the scarce resources of society should not be used to support the lower classes, as that only encouraged more of their kind. Instead, life-saving medical care and intervention should be rationed so that those resources can be best put to use elsewhere. So-called negative eugenicists even took things further, with some, like famed playwright George Bernard Shaw, calling for people to be called before a state-appointed board to justify their existence or be put to death.
But there are an extraordinary number of people whom I want to kill. Not in any unkind or personal spirit, but it must be evident to all of you, you must all know half a dozen people at least, who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. And I think it would be a good thing to make everybody come before a properly appointed board, just as he might come before the income tax commissioners, and say every 5 years or every 7 years, just put him there and say, "Sir or Madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence?"
This is still the same agenda. Scientific societies are as yet in their infancy. It is to be expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality than they now have even in totalitarian countries. Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will, so that, after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. For the heart of thinking, I'll repeat that. Scientific societies are as yet in their infancy. It is to be expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality than they now have even in totalitarian countries. Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will, so that, after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable. And any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Listen again. Diet, injections. What have they gone after? All of the food. They've altered all of the food. Injections. Huh? You thought polio and all that was to prevent polio? These injections they give you, mumps, rubella, whooping cough, etc. Really. See the effects all around us as the IQ plummeted. Diet, injections, think, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. impossible. Are you beginning to understand why you get that stare, that when the eyes turn off, glazed, when you start telling them what's happening? Are you beginning to see why? It's not that they just don't want to understand. You see, most cannot. Gradually, by selective breeding, the congenital differences between rulers and ruled will increase until they become almost different species. A revolt of the plebs would become as unthinkable as an organized insurrection of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. In like manner, the scientific rulers will provide one kind of education for ordinary men and women, and another for those who are to become holders of scientific power. And that's what he means about the technocrats. The technocrats would have the scientific power. Ordinary men and women will be expected to be docile, industrious, punctual, thoughtless, and contented. Ordinary men and women will be expected to be docile, industrious, punctual, thoughtless, and contented. Of these qualities, probably contentment will be considered the most important. In order to produce it, all the researches of psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and biochemistry will be at play. All the boys and girls will learn from an early age to be what is called cooperative. That is, this is a definition of his version of cooperative, to do exactly what everybody is doing. Cooperative. To do exactly what everybody is doing. Sameness. Initiative will be discouraged in these children, and insubordination, without being punished, will be scientifically trained out of them. Once again, the scientific rulers will provide one kind of education for ordinary men and women, and another for those who are to become holders of scientific power. Now that's why the foundations set up the different schemes and grants and bursaries at universities. Scholarships were the way to go. All the scholarships were to recruit into the fold of technocrats, obedient, higher, but yet still indoctrinated people that would control the rest. There are actually layers of us, you see, layers of society and technocracy. And cooperative is to do exactly what everybody is doing. Sameness, all saying the same thing, doing the same thing, having the same opinions, all from television and media and magazines and experts, because they have no thoughts of their own. Initiative will be discouraged in these children, and insubordination without being punished will be scientifically trained out of them. Groupthink has been used in schools, you see, for years. The reason it was because Russell was the guy who came up with it all a long time ago and experimented on them. He, Huxley, and many others, using different techniques, and a lot of medical personnel too, and those involved in the creation of particular organisms that affect your physiology. The Charles Galton Darwins, who suggested that we change the hormonal streams of male and female. It's all been done.